Okay. Hello. Today we're going to be introducing Michael Pearce, who's professor of art at the Lutheran University in California. And he's a fervent, enthusiastic promoter of figurative art and the physical skills to help deliver the creative art, basically. Very nice guy too. You met him, Freya. You met him in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I did. And yeah, it was really nice listening to both of you talk both times because you're both incredibly enthusiastic. I think you have the same bugbears, but it's not, you don't wallow in it. And I think it really fit well with the idea of the podcast where we wanted to talk about the future optimistically. And this is a really good example of specifically talking about art and its future and how that's going in a positive direction, or that's how Michael feels about it anyway.
Yes.
And he explains why as well. And I found it incredibly heartening, this sort of opening up of the art world where the previous hierarchy becomes multiple hierarchies, which in a way is a form of democracy, I suppose.
Yes, yes. I mean, it could be a hierarchy of one in the future. It's interesting. Actually, it was very interesting. And he wrote a very nice article about the NFTs, which was interesting for Mutual Art. But, you know, he was interesting to talk to. It's a shame he's no longer doing the annual conferences because I only went to the last one and it was brilliant. Met a lot of great artists and saw a lot of fantastic art being done as well as being displayed.
When you say conferences, you mean, what was it called? What was the name of it?
I think it was called, I can't remember, Track?
But it was about representational art, wasn't it?
Yeah, Track, the Representational Art Conference. Yeah. Anyway.
By the way, I shouldn't say this because it's very gloaty, but you were both talking about Mucha and his Slav epic that you both missed when you went to Prague, and I in Tokyo saw it. I had to queue up for 3 hours because that's how they like to do things here. But we eventually got in. And I remember, like, after maybe an hour and a half, I was like, I'm so hungry, I'm so tired, this better be good. And I had no idea the scale of that work. So for anyone who listens to this, or just generally, you've got to look up the Slav epic. And if you can find any pictures of the scale of it, because each painting is about the size of a building. But more generally, I just thought all of the artists that you talked about and the way that you guys talked about them, there's something just a lot more joyful when you're in the conversations in the realms of representational art. There's just something a little bit less masochistic, a little bit more joie de vivre.
Yeah, yes. Yes.
I'm trying to find a picture of me with the Slav epic now for anyone who's watching the video, because I have got a picture of me in front of it and I'm about the size of a dot compared to it.
I think some of them are 24 feet. Is that high or wide? It's a figure that's sort of in my mind, but they are huge. They are.
What was going through my mind was, how on earth did they transport these? And there must only be like 3 buildings in a country that can exhibit them.
But Tokyo makes sense because they so love Mucha, don't they?
They really, really do. And after I saw that exhibition, I was having dinner in one of my favorite restaurants, Andore, named after Andre the Giant, weirdly. And the owner was saying that I had to go and see another Mucha exhibition, which I hadn't even known was on, because one of your pieces of artwork was in it. And it was the one, it was the one that you were talking about there with Michael. They sort of had a section, as you said, after you see all the Mucha artwork, where they show artists who've been influenced by it. And I presume you didn't know they'd done that because you were surprised when I told you about it.
No, I didn't. I didn't know about it until you told me, yeah.
I'm still trying to find this picture. Maybe I should have done that before we started talking. I'm nearly there. You see, this is the thing. I can go back through my photos and I'll generally know when I took the picture by how long or short or what colour my hair was. Here we go. So here is one of them. Sorry, this isn't very good for the podcast, but you can see some people at the bottom there.
Yes. Oh, I know that piece. Yeah.
Here's one of Mitzi S. trying to get near one of them.
Yes. They're fabulous.
I mean, they're not, oh God, I love this one. They're not just massive though, because like you'd think at the scale that they are, you'd get up close and they'd be a mishmash, but they're not. Up close, they're incredible. You know, half a mile away, they're incredible. That's what it's all about, isn't it? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that makes me think, God, this is why we're here, isn't it?
Yeah, why we do what we do.
Yeah, it's like he had, his superpower was art. Someone needs to come up with that superhero.
Yeah. Well, today I'm very pleased to introduce Michael Pearce, a great professor, philosopher, and promoter of the best in art. He's also an artist, pretty good one. So, Michael Pearce. Okay, Michael, we are recording.
Hey there.
Now, we met, what, 2 or 3 years ago now?
Must be, mustn't it? Over in Ventura, California.
Yes.
At the Representational Art Conference.
Yes. Yeah. And sadly, you told me that was the last one you were going to do.
I'm afraid so. The perfect storm that managed to make it possible passed. You know, it really was an extraordinary set of circumstances that made that event work. And those circumstances have all gone now, which is a real shame. But mind you, I must say, I don't regret it passing too much because it was absolutely exhausting.
Well, for me, I regret it because if it wasn't for your invitation and me going out there, I knew nothing about this world. You would think I would, but I didn't.
Go figure, huh?
And
because you know you're such a hero to so many of the folks who attended track, and it was great having you there. We loved having you there.
Well, not as much as I love being there.
It's
and meeting all those very amazingly talented people.
We should explain what it is for people listening, I guess.
You should.
You know, it was the Representational Art Conference was an event for art historians and artists and writers, journalists, anyone, you name it, anyone who was interested in paintings of stuff that looked like stuff in all of its aspects. I know that sounds kind of prosaic, but there weren't any academic conferences at all that dealt with just representational art, which is kind of crazy, right? There was a huge gap. So we wanted to build the community of people who were really interested in this kind of art, representational art. And so that's why we did it. We started it in 2011. The first one was in 2012. And the last one was the one that you came to, which was 2019.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was a great event. It was such good fun. It really was a blast because everyone was so happy.
I was.
Yeah.
I remember I had a fall and I was on crutches when I arrived.
Were you really? I don't remember that.
Good. Yeah. I had a fall at Michael's place.
Oh.
2 days before I caught the flight.
Oh, goodness.
Anyway.
So you were suffering on the flight over, huh?
No, because I was sitting down. It was no big deal.
Oh, is that right?
It didn't really hurt unless I tried to walk.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you didn't show it at the conference at all. We all thought you were very sprightly and having a good time. You're walking around with a big grin on your face most of the time.
I was like a child in a candy store. It was so much amazing, beautiful work and so many very clever people. Yeah,
I think what people are surprised by is the quality of the work. There are so many fantastic painters out there now. You know, I would dare say that we have painters now who rival the great painters of the Renaissance. It's that level of quality and skill. It's just extraordinary.
Yes, I would agree with you. But what the Renaissance had is that they invented the Renaissance.
Yeah, we didn't come up with it.
Well, in terms of architecture, they were simply copying. But when it came to painting, they didn't really know to copy.
It was glorious, wasn't it? I mean, they had the classical sculptures, you know, they were looking at that stuff. And they were they digging up Pompeii already at that point? I'm not sure they were. I think that came a bit later, didn't it? But they had classical antiquity to look at. And so they were following the sculptural work of classical antiquity. And they also had a lot of texts. And so they were reading about the ancient painters and trying to figure out, well, what the hell is Phidias doing? You know, what does this mean? He's using this limited palette. And how does that work? You know, and they're experimenting and trying to duplicate the ancients. I think that's fascinating. But on top of that, you've got all this wonderful, weird Neoplatonism and what we would call natural magic, right? The sort of strange early science, the alchemists, they're all beginning then as well and getting into some very strange imagery. And you see the beginning of emblem books and tarot cards and all this just weird juxtaposition of images that's going on. It's such a cool period. So you get that classical antiquity mixed up with all this hermetic esotericism, and it produces that amazing melange.
You're a professor of art, and
yes.
I can see you seeing all that. But to me, I'm seeing two different things. I'm seeing a Renaissance meaning rebirth of the classical aspirations.
Yes.
In parallel with the North European High Gothic, which was not only, it's in my view, equally fantastic, but way more imaginative.
Yeah. You're thinking of people like Dürer and Cranach and folks like that?
I'm thinking of them, but I'm thinking of the buildings as well.
Oh, yeah. You know, glorious stuff.
Some of those German Gothic cathedrals have stone lacework, which is three-dimensional. And it's mathematically and engineeringly structural. And you think, my God, what were they taking?
They were high on God.
Well, you know, maybe. I think they were high on art, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I think that's more truthful, actually. Yeah. You know, the flying buttresses and things that you're talking about, and the intricate interlacing of the columns and all that you see in the cathedrals. It reminds me a little bit of one or two of your paintings. I'm sure you've sourced those as reference.
I wish. Yes. Well, yes. Yes, it's there.
The same sort of grace. What was that one called that you did? That it was the arches that are rising up, and there's a multitude of these kind of curving arch shapes.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure that
was called arches.
Pardon me?
I said, I think I called that arches.
Oh, it's called arches. Oh, oops.
Just in case anyone was in any doubt of what was going on.
Yeah. You know, your paintings are sourced from so many places. I was thinking about it just before we got on the call, and thinking about Japanese woodblock prints and Chinese Song Dynasty art, but also in the West, because you grew up in Hong Kong, right? I think that's perhaps where you got some of that influence from. 2
very critical years, 12 to 14. So no, I didn't grow up, but I was there. I've told Freya when we've had conversations about, you know, why are men so interested in toy trains? speaking of me, I say because they get their aesthetic sensibility lit up and frozen when they're 12.
Yeah, I think it's true. You know, I think of my own career, the stuff I was doing when I was 15 or so is the same stuff I'm doing now. It's exactly the same. I love writing, I love art, and I love history. You know, there's no difference. We fix these things very early on, I think.
When I came to your conference, what excited me was something I wasn't really thinking was happening, but needed to happen. And that was that reintegration between fantastic ideas and the physical skill to bring them to the world. Because one of the tragedies of a lot of art schools is there are people with fabulous ideas, but they have no skills to manifest them, or inadequate skills. So they have this fabulous idea and it looks so-so because they haven't made it well, or they can't make it well. And that is unfair on them and an indictment of the system, in my view.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I'm a bit more sanguine and cheerful about the whole thing. I think that we're in this rather remarkable period of history right now. You know, I used to really get upset about postmodernism and the harm that it's done to us in matters of ethics and thought. But actually, postmodernity has done us a lot of favors in the sense that it's opened up the art world completely. If everything is equal and everything is relative, then certainly science fiction is equal to classical antiquity. It's you know, you can't say only avant-gardist art is valuable under the thinking of postmodernity. If postmodern thought is true and right, which I'm not sure it is, then all kinds of art form are equally valid, and that includes science fiction and fantasy and whatever you think of, NFTs. You know,
in some worlds, avant-garde means in the front, but in the art world and in, say, music, I think avant-garde actually means cul-de-sac.
Yeah, I agree. You know, this when you say avant-garde, you start thinking about galleries with, you know, weird blobby things and piles of shoes and random juxtapositions of this and that and the other thing. And it's, you know, for most folks, they walk past those galleries and, oh God, you know, what is that rubbish? You know, because literally it's pulled out of a skip sometimes. Damien Hirst did that famous thing where he went to he had a show at a gallery and the reception happened and there were cigarette ends and bottles and empty glasses lying around. And he said, oh, leave it like that, we'll sell it. And then the cleaning lady came in next morning and cleaned it all up and threw it all away. Not realizing that this bunch of bin bags was worth $500,000 Damien Hirst dollars. You know? Such silly stuff. Someone said art is what you can get away with. And I think there's a certain amount of truth to that, or there was. Perhaps people can get away with a bit less these days. I don't know. We seem to be entering a very conservative period. It really worries me a bit, actually. They just put up a statue of Marilyn Monroe in Palm Springs. Oh my goodness, the reaction. Oh, this vulgar, hypersexualized monstrosity. You know, oh, come on. It's this giant statue of Marilyn Monroe. Give me a break. In Palm Springs. It's meant to be there. If it was meant to go anywhere, it was Palm Springs. Then people get their knickers in a twist about all kinds of stuff, don't they? And yeah, I think that's a symptom, though, of this opening up of the art world that we're talking about, that people get upset about it, but it doesn't deter the Palm Springs city authorities from saying, hey, this Marilyn Monroe thing's great, let's put it up. You know, people love this. And so you do have this sense of leveling of the art world. The art elite is no longer an elite. There's this very open world. If you go on Facebook and go into the pre-Raphaelite art group on Facebook and tell them that pre-Raphaelite art doesn't deserve to be shown in a gallery, they'll kill you. you know? You'd be savaged by pre-Raphaelite fans. There isn't this hegemony anymore. I think in some places there's still a hegemony, like New York. I'm told that the galleries in New York are kind of uniformly avant-gardist. I'm not familiar with all the galleries in New York, but I'm told that that's the case. And I could imagine that happening in certain locations where you have this very centralized kind of idea of what art should be.
Yes, I used to think it was the fact that the writers, and I know you're a writer as well as an artist, as well as a professor, but I used to think the writers were to blame because they took over the role of defining what was art, and it became super minimalist as a consequence. There were no writings anymore.
You're thinking of Clement Greenberg and people like that, Edward Jewell and folks like that in the 20th century, I imagine. And
Yes.
Greenberg, you know, the thing about these folks is that they're so tied up with Nelson Rockefeller and the propagandization of this new Western avant-garde, which, by the way, was a totally different thing from the original avant-garde. The original avant-garde became socialist realism. That's the true original Saint-Simonian avant-garde. Then Clement Greenberg took the writings of Guillaume Apollinaire and other French critics and started saying, oh, avant-garde, I can use that, and brought that phrase over to America. And it was really him and Edward Jewell who started introducing the term in America. But yeah, these guys were intimately tied up with the use of avant-garde art as propaganda. The Americans needed to counter, first of all, Hitler, and then Stalin and socialist realists, because they were using art as very effective propaganda. And so they started using the avant-garde as propaganda too. And you can detect it in the speeches of Roosevelt and his shift from social realism in the United States all of a sudden in 1939, when Stalin joined Hitler. Very suddenly, the focus of American government art switched almost overnight from supporting social realism in the Works projects to supporting the Museum of Modern Art and Nelson Rockefeller's agenda, really quite dramatically, a quite dramatic shift. And then post-war, of course, it becomes set in stone for a very long time. I think it's not until the fall of the Berlin Wall that you see a relaxing of American propaganda, using art as propaganda.
So artists didn't really have any role. They were just the pawns.
To some degree, yeah. I mean, there's the thing about American avant-gardism is it's so focused on individual genius, right? That everyone's touted as this brilliant genius painter. Jackson Pollock gets that 8-page spread in Life magazine, which, by the way, is in Nelson Rockefeller's building. They're next door neighbors, and all part of that same kind of machinery of promoting American individualism. So, yeah, they're all touted as individual geniuses. I think that goes hand in hand with the whole.
When I said the artist had no role in it, I would maintain that in the face of what you're saying by saying the artists didn't have any role in it. They were essentially selected.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, they were doing this stuff anyway. But I think they would have been a bywater if it hadn't been for Rockefeller and folks like him, Guggenheim and those kind of people who genuinely enjoyed the art, I'm sure. But they had gobs and gobs of money to throw at it, and this elevated that rather small group into the stratosphere.
You're changing all that, or you will.
I don't know if I'm changing it single-handedly. I hope there's a lot of more people than me.
It was, I mean, when I went to the conference, there was a lot of people there and a lot of enthusiasm around it. And I was very intrigued. And I do remember saying to you a number of times, something I've changed my mind on, by the way, is you can't call this fantasy because that's meant for children. But I realized that was wrong. Tolkien made quite a serious point about fantasy literature was one of the most serious forms of literature.
Mm.
I know it's one person's view, but he wasn't prepared to allow his works to be dismissed as basically for children.
Yeah. Yeah, Tolkien was very astute. You know, he was quite a genius. He spoke Anglo-Saxon fluently and translated Beowulf and was an Oxford Don. And I don't think everyone realizes this of him. He was quite a brilliant guy. He wasn't just a fantasy writer. You know, he was extraordinary. And he said something that caught my attention in a big way. He said something that it was, I forget the exact words now. He said, there's nothing wrong with escapism. Escapism is great. If you're in prison, then escaping is exactly what you want to do. And I think that this is true. And if you accept that life is hard and unpleasant, which it sometimes is, I suppose, then escapism is pretty fantastic. It relieves stress and relieves anxiety and can be very helpful and point you in the right direction when you need to be helped to get out of that mire of despondency and depression or despair or whatever it is. Right. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with fantasy in that sense and escapism in that sense. I think Tolkien was absolutely right. And the other thing that I think of with Tolkien is the amount of work he did to create this universe. It's not so simple to create a world that is convincing. You do this in your paintings too. There are rules in your paintings. There's gravity or a defiance of gravity, but it makes sense. There's a kind of equilibrium there. And you can tell that you've thought through how this world is held together. You know, what are the implications of this strange world, right?
I think that's very much a consequence for me of being at college for 7 years, doing effectively industrial design and architecture, you know, and there was a love of things that work, like bridges and trains and things. I just loved things that work well. But what I didn't like it, and what I really resented and fought, was when, if you say form follows function, and that you look at Nelson's Victory, or you look at a steam engine, you can say, yes, you can see absolutely that the form follows the function. But when you get round to domestic housing, you can see it's a load of bullshit. They didn't know what they were talking about. Absolutely didn't know what they were talking about. When I challenged that at college, I was told to read Corbusier, and I thought, yeah, Corbusier is a communist. That's his only interest and his only idea. When it came down to serving humanity, he wasn't interested in making things that made people feel better. He was only interested in equalizing.
Yeah, in uniformity, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that whole Bauhaus thing, that love of things that looked as if they were made by machines for machines, it's anti-human.
Yeah, thoroughly dehumanizing. You know, it reminds me of a story I heard about the American Air Force when they were first building airplanes, and they were building them in large numbers. They thought, okay, well, how big should the cockpits be? How do we figure out how these people fit in the cockpits? And so they measured all their pilots, and then they took the average of all these different pilots, and they built the cockpit for the average man, the average pilot. And the pilots kept crashing the planes into the ground. And it was because the average means nothing. None of those people could use those controls effectively because they weren't made for them. And that's why they invented adjustable seats and adjustable steering columns, so that they could be made to fit the individual. Because uniformity doesn't work for us. We're not very good at uniformity, and we always rebel against it. When you study Stalinist art, it's the same way, you know.
They also invented ergonomics in terms of how you function. And that was as a consequence, exactly as you're saying, but of the Korean War. They wanted to make planes that people didn't have to think. They could just do it.
Right. Was it you who told me that story? Maybe it was you.
Maybe.
I wonder if it was.
Who knows? It doesn't matter. It's true. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know, and we seem to have this constant struggle between the idea that we should all be the same and the idea that we should be individuals. I've been reading Zola, the French writer, recently, who I love. In fact, I have a portrait of him on the wall over there, which Joe Bravo, who you know, helped me to find. And Zola was the champion of the individual. Sometimes people think that he was writing as a socialist of some sort, like a proto-socialist. But actually, if you read his art criticism, he's just the champion of individualism. And he got into a huge fight with Proudhon, who was a French politician who was a proto-communist. And Proudhon had written in defense of Courbet, and was saying that this is what art should be. We must only make art that serves the communist cause and that promotes the reinvention of the world into this utopia where people will all be equal. And he says to the artists, you artists, if you don't make propaganda for the communist cause, we don't want you, we banish you, get out of here, right? And this doesn't seem very egalitarian to me. I think that's rather authoritarian and kind of terrifying. And Zola takes issue with this, and he says, well, you might as well kill them all. And this struck me as being a remarkable prediction of what actually did happen when we did have this promised communist utopia taking place in Russia, of course, because that's exactly what happened. The individualists were all banished and killed.
It's interesting. You mentioned earlier that this was breaking down the art hierarchy. But I think in a way, there are going to be many art hierarchies. It's not going to be the end of art hierarchies. It's going to be the end of the art hierarchy.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. I think that we're in a bubble bath art world right now. I think each bubble has its own gatekeepers, its own hierarchy. It's like this giant bubble bath. The avant-gardists are here, and they've got a bubble that's kind of gradually going smaller and smaller. And we've got the representational artists, and their bubble's here, and it's gradually getting bigger and bigger. And all these different bubbles have their own gatekeepers and their own authorities. And it's a wonderful anarchy. Bubble bath. I think it's fantastic in some ways. In other ways, I think it's terrible because you also have this giant, appearingly giant bubble of global finance, which seems to have taken some of these some artists as their champions, and they get a lot of attention just because of the golden glow of money that becomes a halo around their head. And that's, I think, worrying. But I think that's part of the anarchy of this glorious bubble bath, right?
It has a fragility that is exciting.
An exciting fragility.
Yeah, because it's built on nothing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's totally conceptual, isn't it?
Yeah,
it really is. The NFT thing, I just wrote an article about NFTs. Your NFT sale last week got me into it, and it really impressed on me the idea that art in that high finance world is a concept. It's about trust and belief in the solidity of money. And then it occurred to me that, you know, for years we've been walking around with art in our pockets and using it as a symbol of money, in dollar bills and pound notes and Deutschmarks. They're pictures, right? You look at a dollar bill and it's art. It's very clever art too, and some, you know, with the anti-forgery devices that are on it to protect that concept, the sort of perfect idea of value. And I think that's really interesting in that high finance world, is that the art has become this symbol of value and symbol of money.
I remember a long time ago, I wish it happened every day, but a very long time ago, I was in a junk shop that specialized in paper stuff, but not a bookshop. And I found in this junk shop a Mooka banknote.
Really?
And I said, how much is that? And it was, I don't know, 20p, something like that. And I thought, my God, it's so beautiful, 20p. And I laughed and I said, okay, I bet you don't have any more. And they said, oh yeah, we have a bundle. And they came up with this bundle. I don't know how many there were, maybe 50. And I said, would you be prepared to sell the lot? And they said, yes, but we can't give you a big discount. I said, okay. So I bought them and they were exquisite. I mean, Mooka, you've got to imagine he would design something very beautiful. And he did. Yeah. And it wasn't just
gorgeous.
It wasn't just beautifully designed. It was printed on paper that's designed to survive the rough and tumble of the world, and to hold the print. It's not meant to fade and disintegrate. It has the robustness of a serious work of art, and it was.
I'm interested that you bring up Mooka, and I'm not surprised that you would appreciate his art at all, because I can see that kind of thread of art history in your work. I think you must have seen the Slav epic at some point, right?
No, only in pictures. I was in Prague once hoping to see it, and it wasn't in Prague when I was there.
Yeah,
it was across the border, and it wasn't in the Czech Republic. It was across the border. Have you actually seen it?
No, I wish. Like you, I was in Prague and managed to miss it.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't there. So I think it's in a church in, I forget where. Anyway, yeah. I've seen pictures, gorgeous, huge.
He must be one of your precedents in art history, don't you think? If you place yourself in a lineage of art history and think about the kind of inheritance of ideas and imagery.
I would say yes to that, but the reason is that he combined a fabulous aesthetic and design and art. So he did more than just paint, or more than just design.
Well, I look at your Yes logo, for example, and all your calligraphy work, and it reminds me a great deal of Mooka and those beautiful floral kind of, well, they're not floral really, are they? Those graceful, elegant curlicues that he puts on things.
I did do an homage to Mooka in the Yes Songs logo.
Did you? Yeah.
And it ended up in a book recently, a couple of years ago, which was a book of people who'd done homages to Mooka.
Well, you're a big influence on me for sure in my paintings. I often think of you and your landscapes. I just painted a big painting with umbrella trees, and I think, oh, Roger would like this.
Why didn't you show me? Please.
I'll send you a JPEG of it so you can see.
Yeah. So you didn't think anyone would want to pick up the baton on the conference?
Well, I did, but no one came forward. I mean, to underwrite it would cost quite a lot of money. So I guess if there's someone out there with pockets that are deep enough to withstand it, then it'll carry on. At the moment, American universities are being beaten with a stick because of COVID. And so I'm quite sure there won't be a new version of it, at least coming out of my university for a while, because of the impact of COVID on the budget. There's just no way. We can't afford to do that.
I think what it shows, and what I loved about it, is that you could see what happens when people have ideas that they can convert with joy and skill. What an incredibly exciting outcome there can be.
Yeah, yeah. It was a joyful occasion each time we did it. It was such a lovely event, and the community is still there and still strong. And it's remarkable. On Facebook, I run the representational art group, and people in that group are old friends. You know, it's a 10-year-old friendship now.
And what's the exact address?
It's the representational art group. And you can't find it anymore because we were getting bombarded with fake accounts. And so I had to turn it off, unfortunately. So you can only get in by invitation from an existing member. So if anyone listening wants to get in, then they could find me on Facebook quite easily. I'm Michael Pearce on Facebook, and you should be able to find me there. And just send me a message and I'll happily let you join the group. You
got bombarded by what?
Well, all Facebook groups now are having trouble because we get probably 50 to 100 fake accounts trying to join the groups each week. And so it becomes an incredible pain in the neck to have to filter through all the people who want to join the groups. They want to send spam and junk, and they have no regard for the purpose of the group. The purpose of the representational art group is to talk about representational art and to enjoy representational art, and not to show us pictures of your socks drying or whatever it is. You know what I mean? People put all kinds of rubbish up, and hundreds of fake accounts are being created on Facebook all the time. And you can identify them very quickly because they've been created in the last 3 weeks, and they're full of junk. But to go through and examine each account takes a huge amount of time. And so, you know, I just don't have the time to do that anymore. But the group is still there. You know, we still have the group, but you can only get in by invitation. It's an exclusive group now.
Kind of making Facebook increasingly less useful.
Yes, very much. It's still useful and still a great way to reach out and find people. But yeah, it's becoming less and less of a great place.
It's a shame.
It is.
You're professor of art at the Lutheran University.
Yeah, California Lutheran University. That's right.
Is that more to do with painting and drawing, or to do with history?
You mean what I teach?
Yeah.
No, I teach philosophy of art, and I teach painting and drawing. So I teach painting people and drawing people, and I teach the philosophy that's behind it, right?
So which would you say is your main love, or is it all combined?
It's all the same thing. I mean, it's all the same thing. The history and the painting, and it all goes together. They feed each other. My experience of making art feeds my experience of the philosophy of art, as much as the philosophy of art feeds my experience of painting. You know, it helps me to understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, what my place is in art history, if I have a place in art history. You know, where do I belong and why? It certainly has helped me to understand the situation now by teaching philosophy of art, because I have to know the stuff. I can't get away with it. I can't just wing it. I can't read a book 10 years ago and kind of pretend that I know what I'm talking about. I have to know it. Yeah. And that really helps me, because it's made my understanding of contemporary art so clear compared to what it was in the past. I think it's really important that artists should be thinkers too. They should read and think a lot. And in fact, I've noticed that among contemporary artists that people like you, I mean, look at you, you're sitting in front of a giant bookcase. People like people, you know, successful artists, they tend to be readers.
They're all reference books.
Right. Look at that huge library. Right. Here's mine. You know.
Yeah.
You know, I have another 2 bookcases just like that in the other room back there, and then another one in my studio. So yeah, I think a lot of people are like us. Connor Walton is the same way. Connor Walton's bookshelves in Ireland, he has you know, 2 yards of philosophy books on his shelves there.
Right.
I think it really matters to be a reader and a painter. They go together very, very closely.
Well, I can understand you saying that, but it isn't necessarily a universal.
Oh, no, no. Some painters are quite unread.
It's like musicians too. They can be scholarly, but it isn't a requirement.
No, not at all. I think it helps, though. You know, it does give some depth to the work, right? And the same in music. You know, I listen to Yes music, and I hear Rick Wakeman playing the piano, and he's clearly an incredibly well-trained classical musician, without doubt. He can't have done this without being incredibly well-trained, right? But that doesn't mean he's necessarily the most well-read musician, right? They don't necessarily go together. I'm sure Rick is incredibly well-read, by the way. I don't know Rick, I've never met him, but just plucking an example out of the air, there's a degree of skill and training that is only, they feed each other, right? In reading,
I totally agree. There's a lovely Japanese phrase from Kendo, which I love bringing up all the time, and that is that you train the hand so the hand in its turn can train the mind.
Yeah.
But there's a but here. There is a clear difference between training and learning. You can learn a lot by reading a book, but you can't train the hand by reading the book.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's the old 10,000 hour thing, isn't it?
Yes, you've got to put in those hours and do that incredibly repetitive work.
Yeah.
And the only way to do it, there's only one way you can really do it, and that's to really love it. Otherwise, suicide would be the outcome.
Absolutely right. Yeah, totally correct. I couldn't agree more. You know, this is one of the things that one tries to impress upon young people getting into the art world is, hey, you know what? It isn't all about hanging about in a bistro, drinking coffee and looking cool. That's not what it is. You know, you have to make stuff, and it has to be good. It has to be really good. And then you'll make it, you know? And the dream of being an artist isn't the reality of it. You know, in the 19th century, the Bohemians, they thought that there were essentially only a couple of different kinds of artists, right? There was the Bohemian who was on his way to the poorhouse and then to death, and then there was the Bohemian who was going to become a bourgeoisie. And then the only two paths.
Do you know where that phrase came from?
Where?
Bohemian.
Oh, tell me.
There was a heresy in Europe that was amazingly widespread, probably the most widespread. And it came from a simple idea that human beings were made in the image of God, and therefore they weren't to be controlled by governments and things like that. They were divine spirits, and they could wander around, walk in your house, help themselves to a glass of wine and wander off. Gave rise to all kinds of things like the Anabaptists and so on. But the heresy of the free spirit was the most powerful and most widespread. And as with many religious ideas, what gives them a real kick is when the government or the royalty take it on board. And the first person to take it on board was the King of Bohemia. So the phrase Bohemian really relates to this heresy of the free spirit, which the King of Bohemia took on board. It also is the root of the word hobo, boho.
Yes, yeah, right. Well, that makes complete sense. I'm going to have to do some digging in that. That's fascinating. Yeah, thank you for telling me that.
Well, there's a beautiful book on it, on the subject, written, I don't know, maybe 50 years ago or more, by Nick Cohen, and it's called In Pursuit of the Millennium.
Huh.
Well,
definitely going to have to get a copy of this.
Yeah.
I thought I'd read everything about Bohemians, but I haven't read that one.
Well, there might be other books. It's the Heresy of the Free Spirit. There is definitely books with that as a title, by the way.
Fascinating. That totally makes sense, doesn't it? You know, you've known Bohemian life, Roger, in your youth.
I wish.
Or you lived with Sid Barrett. How much more Bohemian could you be?
We never had a coherent conversation.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, but you were there, right in the heart of Bohemian art circles, weren't you?
Yes, as seen from the outside, definitely would seem that way. But seen from the inside, I don't know. I don't think anyone was aware of anything like that at the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Isn't it funny how that sort of thing happens? You know, we don't realize what we're in. We're not self-consciously aware of this being a moment in art history, right?
No, no, no. And there were several. I mean, when I was at Canterbury College of Art, bands like, well, firstly the Wildflowers, then Caravan and Soft Machine, all came out of that period when I was there. And that was interesting too. But again, one wasn't aware of it being a magical moment. But people writing about it thought it was.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. It just was. When you were in it, it just was, wasn't it?
Yes, it just was, yes.
Yeah.
Do you teach creativity?
Well, boy, that's a hard thing to do, isn't it? You know, I try to impress upon the students that they've got to have the 100,000 hours or whatever it is. You know, they have to work. But within that work, they also have to be creative. And I try to show them methods for encouraging creativity, like for example, keeping dream journals. And whether they do it or not, I don't know. It's not something you can grade. It doesn't fit into a systematic approach to teaching art at all. So that would be hard to do. I think probably the closest person who came to that was Joseph Beuys.
Really?
Yeah. Joseph Beuys, he refused to grade people. And I'm totally in sympathy with him. Because if you're grading people, how can you grade creativity? It's something that grows and develops, you know. And I really have a lot of sympathy for Beuys in that regard.
Well,
and I think, go ahead, sorry.
I would not necessarily agree with you for two reasons. One is you can see the product of it for sure.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And I think whether or not you grade it, I would argue you can definitely teach it.
I think you can encourage. I think you can encourage it to come forth.
Yes.
You can provide the circumstances in which young people feel that this is an okay thing. It's okay for them to experiment and to try things out without necessarily feeling the opprobrium of a bad grade. Right? There's some.
It's very interesting. You must have heard writers talking about the creative process. Whether they, you know, you must separate the day when you're being creative from the day when you're doing the editing. Do it in a different room, different time, but don't ever edit when you're writing creatively.
Yeah, Hemingway said something like this, didn't he? I was reading his journal of his life in Paris, and he wrote that he would have his own little kind of garret space, and this was where he wrote. And he would go into this cold garret and write all day or all morning or whatever his habit was, and he would leave that there. And when he left, that was it. He wouldn't think about writing, and he went to great lengths not to think about the writing he did. And then he would go back to the garret next day and read what he had done the day before. So it was fresh and uncluttered. I thought that's very interesting because it's a slightly different approach and a different attitude to creativity, isn't it?
I've heard lots of writers say writer's block is when you do the two things at once. You try and be creative and you try and edit. And the two things are counterproductive.
Yeah,
One
that makes sense.
cancels the other.
Yeah.
So that's something you could teach. How would you market? You're right. I can't see how you would market.
Right.
You can't even tell if a student is experiencing it, but you can tell them, don't do that. Don't edit while you create. Don't use systematic analysis before you've come up with the idea, because it will cancel the idea before it's born. Once you've come up with the idea, be as systematic and analytical as you like. Figure it all out. Make sure you know where every nut and bolt goes, because you're going to bring it into the world. But when the idea is coming, that very fugitive thing needs space and no rational interference.
And you're fond of telling the story of your friend who's Ramesses, right? Who told you that the ideas come from over here.
Yes, that's right.
I love that story because it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Ideas they're not something you kind of build. No, see, that's not true. You do build them, but they start somewhere, and you can imagine the thing before it becomes real, and then your job is to shape it and make it into the real thing.
Yeah.
And you have to allow that thing to develop itself, right? It has to write itself or paint itself to some degree, and gradually develop into the finished work. Joe, my friend and your friend Joe Bravo, he loves that.
Yes.
He loves that Ramesses album because there's a song on there which is "You're the Only One, Joe." So whenever I want to poke fun at him, I always play "You're the Only One, Joe" to him.
I'm amazed people know that, because it was a very groundbreaking album in my view, but not widely known. It didn't sell very many, sadly.
No. Well, definitely a product of its time, that one.
Yes.
Musically
speaking. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it could have been an early breakthrough prog rock album if anyone had known about that at the time. Yeah,
I think so. And speaking of your Baroque Gothic architecture, you've got that church literally taking off on the front of that album.
That's right. That was his idea, not mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was one of those rare occasions when somebody sits in front of me and comes up with an idea, and I think, oh yeah, I can do something with that. Yeah.
Nice.
I'm going to say, Michael, that I'm going to wrap it up now, because do you mind if I say goodbye, but don't go, because I want to talk to you afterwards. So, Michael, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope we can do this again and talk more, because there was all kinds of seriously controversial stuff I wanted to talk to you about, and we were very gentle with the art world today, and I don't think it's entitled to get away with it that easily. So,
you want to savage the art world a bit?
A bit more anyway, that's for sure. So for now, Michael, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Roger. It's a real pleasure.
I'm going to stop recording now.